Right, Neil Petrie from Free and Equal talking to Nigel Furness, a long-term activist in Brighton and Hove. Now, I think the way we can start today is to go through your early experiences regarding really your background in the Communist Party and the experience you had with Edward Heath, as maybe an intro to talk us through how you were involved with that and then what you learned as a communist that is useful on the organisational side, which they are experts at. So let's start with who you are really in terms of how you got into the communist side and go from there.
Well, it all began in 1964 when a friend of my brother's was very heavily involved in the Labour Party, and he invited me down to a count. That's the first count I ever undertook in 1964, and it was the first Labour victory ever in Sussex. We were there all night and some. After 7 recounts, Dennis Hobden, a local postman, won the seat for Labour by just 7 votes. Well, that was it. I was hooked.
Wasn't fiddling the postal vote or anything?
Oh, that thought never occurred. But this guy, Rob Stone, I don't know whether he's alive or dead nowadays, but he was, he had an influence over me, left wing. And then just, I think, in 1966, the second election of that year, just up the road in Pembroke Avenue, I hadn't left home at that point, and I was 18 by then, 16, I beg your pardon, 66. Oliver Moxon, the Liberal candidate, rented a whole house and had it as his election campaigning centre. So needless to say, that interested me, and I went along and I thought, well, the Liberal Democrats, it's something different. Now, I'd always been brought up as a Conservative. My parents were both very conservative, and it's the typical teenager. Well, you think for yourself. You think, well, yes, I can find out for myself. All I can say about that is something my late granny, Northern Irish lady, used to teach her kids, my mum being one of them, experience is the only teacher, but the fees are exceedingly high, as I found out only too well. So yes, and that is, I think, everybody, I think, is the same. You have to learn. We can say, we can advise, we can tell people, but to carry people with us, it's frustrating because it takes far longer, but it means that people have to find out by their own experiences, and only then, once bitten, twice shy.
So I know. It's a deeper lesson for them.
Deeper lesson.
Personal, yeah.
Exactly right. And that, when people have learned from their own experience, then the truth bombs, or call it whatever you want, that we've been delivering, then they come to the forefront of their mind, and you've got them on board. It's, in other words, quite unlike with the communists who believe in brainwash, re-education, need I go on? People have to find out for themselves, and when that veil is lifted, I now absolutely hate, loathe and detest everything about communism or anything remotely like it. But I wonder if I hadn't gone through that experience of 5 years in that party, having been elevated at the age of 20, I can't remember if it was 20, late 22 or early 23 years of age. Oh, right, we need him on the Central Committee because of my trade union activities. And well, trust me, it's they were ruthless people. Very ruthless people. But the thing I learned most of all out of that experience is focus. You have to have an aim, and you have to focus to the detriment of everything else. Also, guerrilla tactics. Guerrilla tactics work. We attacked the poor Ted Heath. I could almost feel sorry for it. Oh, there was no violence. It was all done. The pen is mighty and the sword. and the tongue is mightier still, I believe. And it's what you say, how you construct things. There are wonderful words in the English language, and one of my favourites is tantamount, because you can't say you're a liar, Mr. Heath, but you could say everything you have just informed me is tantamount to a pack of lies, and nothing can be done about it. So
did they teach this type of thing specifically as well?
Oh, they didn't teach that kind of thing. I was elevated very quickly because I gave them, to my eternal shame, I gave them that idea.
Right.
Because, there are a lot of very, you can imagine, very militant people who could be very quickly inclined to violence. No violence was ever committed because that was clamped down on straight away. But you knew the ones who just wanted the streets to run red with blood, that they would, psychopaths, frankly, who would just revel in it. Yeah. That's the very opposite of what I want. I want change. This is why direct democracy has appealed to me so much. Because, yes, proper democracy, I don't want to see an uprising on the streets here. I firmly believe that the powers that be are doing their damnedest to provoke an insurrection, then they'll clamp down with martial law. But they seem to have forgotten that they've defunded the army to such a degree, and they're so busy doling out money to Ukraine and wherever else they've got their grubby paws. So that's not going to work very well for them either.
So what happened with Ted Heath? Because he came down to Port Slade, yes? And this was during the 3-day week, was it? And the power issues then? The
3-day week came about precisely because of myself being the shop steward in an office where only 11 people, there were 11 members of the CPSA. Now that stood for the Civil and Public Services Union, but the local press were very quickly declaring they're not so civil servant. You can guess who.
It's the Communist Party.
Oh yes,
South Anglia.
And Mao is alive and well and living above a bookshop in Brighton. What happened was, we went on strike. We were on a work to rule. It was over two things. One, it was over the pay claim, because Ted Heath and his be tough on the unions, cracking down on wage rises. Inflation was horrendous, quite obviously from a purely trade union point of view, and that's what it was that it began as. We went on a work to rule, a go slow. I was attacked by the office manager, and who threw a very weak punch connected with my cheekbone, and I just got hold of him by the shoulders and rammed him into a metal filing cabinet. Unfortunately for both of us, the surveyor, that's the boss of the Customs and Excise in Shoreham harbour, Shoreham port, was watching, and one thing led to another. And it wasn't me that called the strike, it was the only woman we had working there. One Lillian Duncan, the late Lillian Duncan, who said, right, well, if you're going to put up with this, I'm not. Everybody out. I had been called a little Irish bastard. A little IRA bastard as well. Why? Because my family lived in Northern Ireland. I was to and fro up to 3 times a year visiting the family and trying to preach the trade union message, the communist message, never mind the religions, never mind the two different communities. Exactly the same seems to be happening right now, fast forward 50 odd years. And that is what led to the strike. And what happened next was the union, we got the guy who came down with the strike pay, and, well, I can't really say we kidnapped him, but let's put it this way. He was persuaded to say that he was the union negotiator, and he had a big long list of every port. Ironically, the first port on the thing, because of alphabetical order, was Belfast. However, that's by the by. And he came down, Terry his name was, and he said, yes, but I don't know how to negotiate, I've only come with the strike pay. Those were the wonderful days when everything was cash, the internet had never been heard of. Anyway, we said, yeah, but what if I can't answer the questions? Well, we'll have an adjournment, said I. Well, there were quite a few adjournments, and needless to say, Harry Knight, the surveyor, became ever more suspicious. Yes, tell me, what university did you attend? We'll have an adjournment, said I. This went on and on and on. And we had, in the end, they called for peace talks. Right? Yes, peace talks. We met in the Schooner pub, it's still there. The downstairs bar could be hired for occasions. We met down there, thrashed out an agreement, and Harry Knight was actually a lovely guy. I got on with him very well, aside from the politics. But he used to invite me into his office for a sherry. Well, that caused the officers who were in a different union, the HEOs, the higher executive officers, there's a Welsh guy, Mr. Edwards, he said, right, well, if you're coming back, when we had the peace deal, we're out, two can play your game, boyo, said he, and they went on strike. And poor Ted Heath said the news at 10, but that's a story slightly later. Getting back to that, when we were having these talks, and it was Harry Knight who displayed a sense of humour and said how very appropriate the pipe music in the background was. Bridge Over Troubled Waters by Simon and Garfunkel, played at a very low volume. That broke the ice. However, the situation deteriorated because and I was the lowest grade. I was merely what was I? Temporary, TA. I can't even remember the position it was. All I had to do, basically, I mean, taxpayers' money was funding me to sit and read the Times most of the day. Yes, seriously, I had to cut out the rates of exchange every day, paste them, yes, very old school, paste them into a great big scrapbook thing so that they could check all the time to do with the imports and exports, right? Yeah. Put a date stamp and JNF, my initials, on everything. So as to protect the Queen's money, everything had to go through 5 sets of officers. Wow. Yes, honestly. And if people but knew, you know, I was being paid to do that, well, I didn't mind. We were, of course, supposed to read and familiarise ourselves with the ESTA code, which is short for Establishment Code. Every day there'd be about a foot or 18 inches thick, all these envelopes, A4 envelopes, page after page after page after page came through, and these were all stacked up. There was a huge big filing room which took up most of the basement, and that's where that was put away. So when we decided to end the strike and instead go back to a work to rule we did. We all sat around familiarising ourselves with the ESTA code, which probably would have taken us most of the rest of our lives to read, mark and inwardly digest. Tactics, you see, guerrilla tactics. Yeah. Tactics are everything. You can have an idea, but we realised very, very quickly this strike isn't working. For the simple reason, you know, we're all half-starved because we're only getting the strike pay. Yeah. There's a complete impasse. Yeah. But then, of course, the miners decided to have Joe Gormley and Mick McGahey. Yeah. Well, obviously, I met them both, and it didn't take long to meet them, and I was very impressed with the both of them. They had a work to rule, and of course, when we weren't reading the ESTA code, I noticed, what's this? Coal from Australia. They were importing coal from Australia to try and undermine, pardon the pun, undermine the NUM. Yeah. I said, I'm not signing it. What do you mean you're not signing it? I said, I'm a trade unionist, and we're all in the Trades Union Council. I said, there's no way I can do that. The coal piled up, there were literally mountains of coal on the south side of Aldington, basin, pardon me, you could barely see the power station entry. Chucked among it, this is the situation it got to, these weird aluminium, huge aluminium with great big dimples in them, full of scotch. We were one of the main ports for exporting scotch from the south coast across the continent. They couldn't find any room to, but they were just chucked higgledy-piggledy around, because down came the TV cameras, and of course the other surveyor, Mr. Andrews, and also the chairman of the Port Authority were stood together on the quay. No, there's absolutely no problem here, we can cope. Well, I couldn't resist. Mr. Furness, what have you got to say? I said, can you pan your cameras over that way, please? I said, pray tell, gentlemen, what's this, Scotch mist? That went out on the news at 10 and the tea time news as well. Well, eventually, I was called into the surveyor's office, Harry Knight's office, and would you care for a sherry? I said, well, that'd be very agreeable. He was a perfect old gentleman. And he said, now I have some news for you. He said, the Prime Minister has requested an audience with you in number 10. Well, Ted Heath was of the belief that, we'll sit down, roll up our sleeves over beer and sandwiches, get the trade unions in, and we can sort out this little local difficulty. I said, I'm perfectly prepared to meet Mr. Heath. I said, but it'll be on my terms. Oh, there you go again, sir. Exasperated Harry Knight. The Prime Minister wishes an audience with you. Well, the Prime Minister can come and have one here, said I. And guess what? He did, but he got no further than the Custom House, because we called up the Betsanger Colliery, the NUM in Kent, the old Kent mines, the coal mine.
Okay.
We got about 300 flying pickets over, and we were hidden under the two railway bridges opposite the Custom House, the embankment, the railway's right by the coast road, half in one, half in the other, and we had people watching that couldn't be seen. He's coming. What did Ted Heath turn up in? A battered old grey Cortina. Yes, so as not to be obvious, but it was the entourage of two in front and two behind, of black cars. Yeah. Swanky black cars with blacked out windows, which clearly told us, and there we saw Ted Heath come out. Right, that's it, and a given call from me, the whole lot charged across, stopped the traffic on the coast road, completely surrounded the Custom House, and there he stayed for approximately 3.5 hours. We said, we're going nowhere. That, of course, did not get on the news. I'm sure a D notice had been put about it, but...
not even the local news?
No. Oh gosh, no. Oh no. And police came, but the police stood well back. There was no interaction. Yeah. They stood well back.
So you're the cause of the flying pickets being...
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid I'm the cause of quite a number of things I now maybe bitterly regret, but I do not regret getting rid of Ted Heath, because my family were always, and everybody back in the 1950s, was opposed to the idea of us joining the common market as it then was, and I was always opposed to it. And Ted Heath, of course, the 1st of January 1973, through the European Communities Act in 1972, which Her late Majesty, in my opinion, committed treason by signing. She had absolutely no right to sign that act. The Queen is meant to be our buffer against over-ambitious politicians. The people are sovereign. That's common law.
Same with Blair as well, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Double jeopardy in these...
Oh, and Major, of course, with Maastricht in 1992. But I digress to wind up this particular story about Ted Heath. News at 10 rang up. And the very next day, what a pity we didn't have video recorders in those days. And subsequently there have been programmes about that very time. But of course, for somebody who was not only there but a key figure in it, it's interesting not a mention of, oh yes, the NUM, but not the CPSA. The CPSA were controlling the country at that time, because I just went across and said, right, and they came, they thought they were going to break the work to rule. I said, what do you think you're doing? Mr. Andrews and Harry Knight, the two joint surveyors, came in with other people I didn't even recognise. Right, we're taking this. I said, you're doing no such thing. I said, get your hands off them and get out of my office. And I said, right, I said, you leave me no choice. I said, because I said, we've already been in touch as a union with the Transport and General Workers Union, the infamous Jack Jones. From many, many years ago.
Yeah, who fought in the Spanish War?
Yes, the Spanish Civil War, the very same. I said, you leave me no alternative, I said, but to go across there, I said, and switch the power station off. I said, and furthermore, I said, if that power station is switched off, the entire country will be switched off. You wouldn't dare, said the normally perfect gentleman, Harry Knight. I said, oh, I do dare. I said, mind you, I had to shove them all out the door. They were all rather reluctant. I literally had to push Ted von der Heid's fat backside out the door. I thought, no you don't, I'll bring up the rear. Over the lock gates we went. There was a boat unloading, and it was coal. Yes. And I said, you realise this is black, don't you? Well, it is coal, said this huge burly bloke. I said, are you Johnny Fox by any chance? Depends who's asking, said he. I said, we are your brothers from Her Majesty's Customs and Excise. I said, and we're on strike as of from now. I said, and you're committing a crime against your fellow trade unions. I think we'd better ring up Jack Jones, the boss, as he called him. So, into the Powell Duffer and Wolfingen Transport, they were the importers, exporters.
Yeah.
Manager, it said on the door, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Just barged in, Johnny Fox, didn't say knock on the door or anything like that. Right, out you, we need to use the phone. You know, mobiles or anything like that in those days. Well, the manager didn't object. He said, well, okay. He said, yeah, but who are these spots? Oh, said he, very, very sarcastically taking about, these are our brothers from Her Majesty's Customs, trying to put on a posh accent. And they, have you gone soft, said the manager. Well, rang up and Jack Jones said, right, okay. Put Johnny back on again. I'm going to instruct him to turn off the power station, and I'm going to make it a national order. All power stations switched off now, unless we have an orderly return to work. Quite unbelievable. I have to pinch myself sometimes and think, did that really happen?
And you were how old at this point?
22.
How long had you been in the Communist Party then?
I've been in the Communist Party since I was 20.
Right. So, in those first 2 years then before this, what were you kind of learning? What were they teaching you? And because you understand that it's all tactical.
Oh yes.
And they're adaptable, aren't they?
Yes.
In the use of their tactics, but they've got quite a good playbook.
Oh, they've got a very, very accomplished playbook.
So, do they just say read these books, study these leaflets?
They do. Oh yeah. Oh gosh, there was the obligatory read your Marx and Engels and Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh and blah blah blah, because they were the Maoist branch of the.
Oh, right,
they were the Communist Party of Britain, Marxist Leninists, and just to confuse matters, there was an offshoot. Now I can't remember the name of them now. There was an offshoot. We never had anything to do. Yes, and they opened a bookshop. Yes, at number 8 Coombe Terrace in Lewis Road. So there were 2 Mao's Lurky and public shops. I've got all the old press cuttings. They're all yellow to the degree now that they've turned brown. But then, of course, ITN rang up, and I had to go up to London and do an interview. Ted Heath was also interviewed. here is the hilarious part of it. News at 10 always began with the gongs of Big Ben.
That's right, yeah.
Gong, MPs locked in the House. The doorman's a member of CPSA. Gong, Mr. Heath, this was Alistair Burnett, who hated Heath and screwed his nose up when he even mentioned the word Heath. He so detested the man. Mr. Heath locked out of number 10. The doorman's a member of CPSA. Dong, as if that weren't enough. Now, even the cook goes on strike at number 10. Poor Mr. Heath, said a sarcastic Alistair Burnett. It would appear nothing's going his way. Well, tonight on News at 10 we have an in-depth investigation into just who or what are the CPSA.
Right.
But it was the way he said, in separate studios. Fitting I was on the left-hand side of the screen as you view it, and it was black and white TV then. A black line, thick black line, about an inch thick down the middle. And on the other side was Ted Heath with that looking down his nose in disgust expression. Oh my God.
How long did he survive after all of this?
How long did who survive? Oh, he survived. He clung on until February 1974.
Right.
Yes, because now, again, of course, there was industrial action, and again, I was leading it. The miners got a big huge, he had to cave in, and then they came back for more, and he had to cave in again in 1973 through to 74, and that of course is when the 3-day week and everything else. And there was also the 3-minute warning. Have you ever heard the 3-minute warning? No, not a nuclear bomb. Well, the lights would flash everywhere. 3 times the lights would dim right down and come right back up again. That meant you had 3 minutes to prepare.
The power going off at your house.
Well, that's it. And here we were, us communists, plotting the evening away in the Kensington pub just on the next corner. The landlady did not particularly like us. She knew who we were. I think she was too afraid to say, "I don't want your custom."
No.
But we got that distinct impression. Now, I remember the first time it happened, everything fell silent in the pub, and all eyes suddenly glared at us. Oh dear.
Guilty party. The accused.
We'll be leaving now.
So how long did you stay in the Communist Party, and what were the major lessons that you've learned from them that are useful for people today who are active in democracy terms?
The useful lessons, I stayed until 1975, and I was expelled from that same Communist Party, and I'll tell you the reason I was expelled. I wasn't the only one either. A lady by the name of Paddy Riley was also expelled, because above the bookshop and behind the bookshop there were 5 units, bedsits that they had, the communal kitchen and bathroom, and a couple I had never wanted to be involved with the party, and that certainly didn't want them to move in. The woman of the piece, who will obviously remain nameless because children were involved, had a son and a daughter who'd been taken off her by social services, but she got together with and married this guy, and they then petitioned to get the kids back, and they did, and all they did was bat them, and we just thought, no, that's it. We put them out, we evicted them from the house, we called social services, we had the children returned.
Did you say that at them?
Oh yes.
Oh gosh, right.
Oh, she was, the woman concerned clearly had mental issues, mental instability. To make matters worse, the girl, who was the elder of the 2 children, I already knew, but I didn't know that was her daughter, because a woman who worked for my mother in the rest home, her family had adopted this little girl. But she's happily back and still in contact, happily back with them, all grown up, in their 50s now. But there was such a hoo-ha, and a meeting was called. Down came Reg Birch, the chairman, and Dorothy Birch, his wife. A real Madame Mal, that one. If ever ruthless woman. Now, she was a head teacher. You would have thought she would have stuck up for children. It never happened, said Dorothy Birch. Well, excuse me, said I, but it did happen. It's not happening anymore because we protected those children. And Paddy Riley, that's a lady from Liverpool, and Paddy Riley shouted, well, may God forgive you, Dorothy Birch, and you, a head teacher. Oh, God now, is it? God exists, does he? Oh, God, vile woman. Reg Birch was fine, but that wife was something else. And that was it, and I was expelled.
Right. So did you set up another party in a different bookshop?
No, I did not. No, I mean, I'll be quite honest with you. I still had a huge interest in politics. I was still delighted that just after that, when first Phnom Penh fell, I can remember on the ITN News.
74, 75?
It was 75. Yeah. And I thought, what's that in the middle of the screen? It was a little red star which suddenly just magnified and the whole screen went red. Oh God, they've won. I thought, I still consider myself to be a communist, but not that type of communist. But very, very quickly things began to happen, and I thought, well, I don't know about this. I just, began to think for myself. I've always been able to think for myself, but when you're in an organisation like that, it's full on brainwash.
Did you find
cult-like? Yes, and it's full on. You'd be ostracised. You know what I mean? You're a bad comrade. You're disloyal. Blah blah blah.
So, what kind of people did you find were attracted to it and stayed with it, as it were, and were loyal to it?
Well, very largely students, and you see, the University of Sussex had a big part to play there, because midway through my term in the Communist Party, and I was working as a kitchen porter at Sussex University by then, and so they set up a University of Sussex branch of the CPBML. That's how rapidly they were growing. And the CPBML, by the way, Reg Birch was the convener at the Ford's Dagenham Works, and of course Ford, the workers, Halewood up and Merseyside, he was very big. He was also the chairman of the old AEF. Do you remember them? The Amalgamated Engineering Federation. Right. Yeah, I've just still got an old box file from the Communist Party HQ up on Bellman's Bookshop, 55 Tufnell Park Road, and I've still got some old box files, case files, etc. 1925, and I thought the other day, my God, that's nearly 100 years old. Didn't they build things to last in those days? So you see, this is the funny thing, in Brighton it was students. In Bristol it was students, but it was all, and there was a dichotomy between the students and the working class militants, and there was always that. Now I remember when I was
the Vanguard Party and the intellectuals felt they should be running and telling all these little workers at the bottom.
Yes, and that is, you've got it in one.
Snobbery of
that's what it's all about. Oh, we'll look after workers. We'll simply replace the current lot and tell them what to do, and further enslave them, much further enslave them, I hasten to add.
Elites, that's all it was.
I like that. Rotating elites.
But what about the personality types? Did you find, like you're saying psychopaths?
There were some very dangerous people. There really were some I'm not going to name names, but there were some very dangerous people locally, and some even more dangerous ones nationally. Oh gosh, I could just picture them, you could just tell by their eyes that they were vicious, violent, bloodthirsty, literally.
It's interesting because there's a good book called The Intellectual History of the British Working Class, and he makes the point that the people in the 20s and 30s, it wasn't about the policies or anything of the communists they didn't like. The working class people just didn't like the communists. It was the personalities of them. You know, that's what really put them off.
They weren't really user-friendly.
Not winning friends and influence.
Well, no.
Yeah.
But you see, this is the point. Thank God I was brought up the way I was, which is the Northern Irish way, that nobody should get above themselves. My mother used to always say, and she'd been a nursing sister, and she always used to say that, you know, basically all human beings are the same. I won't go too graphically into how she further described how we all share the same somewhat crude bodily functions, so people needn't get above themselves, because medics know. Thank God I was brought up that way. And now you see, I had, by a country mile, the best recruitment record. If it moved, I was recruiting. But then, by a charm initiative. There are those that are militant. You only have to look at them. Oh God, that one's scary, people would say. Blokes. Mine, women, oh, I don't like the look of that bunch. It doesn't work. It does not work.
But who were you recruiting? You weren't getting the intellectuals, you were getting
working people.
Right.
Oh God, not intellectuals, working people. God, I had nearly all of the union members in Southwick Custom House, fully paid up members of the CPBML.
So how far did you rise in the organisation?
Well, I rose up. I was very quickly elevated after what happened with the lights being switched off and the Ted Heath thing. 73 by that time, or was it late 72? I can't be specific. I've got to be honest, it's a long time ago, but very quickly I was elevated onto the central committee, and they loved the fact that I spoke well. Now this is Reg Birch, and Reg Birch, lovely guys. I still hold fond memories of Reg Birch. He'd often come down, he'd sleep on the floor of my bedstead, you know, perfectly happy to rough it. A genuine man. It's his wife. That was, no, seriously, that was the real issue. Reg was, I honestly believe that he was honest in his intentions, but it's those intellectual ones. These are the ones, you know, working quietly behind the scenes. I'll tell you something now, and this is something that obviously has never had any publicity. We were on the verge in 1973. Yes, it was 73. It was that winter. We were on the verge of taking over this country, but it would have been a putsch, modelled exactly on how the Bolsheviks overcame the Mensheviks. Do you know why? Because a guy, and I am not going to mention his name, he's dead now anyway, but I'm not going to mention his name, a Canadian fellow, was the Deputy Director General of the BBC. We'd wormed people into very influential positions, exactly the same as what's going on with the woke brigade these days. At a given moment's notice, and it so very nearly happened, he was going to pull the plug, and there would have been an announcement. Reg Birch would have come on the nation's TV screens. Well, we didn't have ITV, but we did have the BBC. There has been a revolution. Please take to the streets and support it.
So, I mean,
that is a fact, and I
thought of planning that, but I mean, what support would there be?
Let's put it this way. I wasn't quite high enough to know where the arms were kept, but there were.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
So, in terms of their reach,
the unions, you see, would have switched off with that. The unions would have just literally switched everything off.
Right.
I mean, we had the trade unions riddled. So, and that was the point.
This makes you think, doesn't it, about, it was in the 80s, I think it was, Maggie got rid of the subversion laws. Now, since then, what we're seeing is a proliferation, obviously, of left-wing Islamists and other groups who are undermining the state, and the terror laws are used for terror. But the subversion laws are about avoiding, these organisations.
Well, the enemy within.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are your thoughts? Did you find the subversion laws were any restriction on these types of people?
None whatsoever, because, the biggest shock of the lot was, and it took me to discover, because I've always been studious, and I'll study things. I don't take for granted. I don't necessarily believe when people say, oh, it's always been the same, it always will be. No. Over the years, many years now, decades, I've developed a saying, which I've often said on public platforms over the years. There are no such words as no, never, or can't in my political vocabulary. However, there is a word, won't. Where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's a political will, there's a political way. I've proven it time and again.
Now, what's interesting, Nigel, is that you went from the Communist Party, you ended up in the Conservative Party headquarters.
Yes.
Now, that wasn't as a subversive, and it wasn't as a plant.
No.
So what's the story behind that?
Well, I'll tell you. Margaret Thatcher, I never had any particular brief for her when she was known as Maggie the Milk Snatcher, but I could not stand Ted Heath. Politically, personally, couldn't stand the man. Everything represented everything I hated. A working class guy, which he undoubtedly was, who went to a grammar school and got so above himself, looking down his nose, lecturing and trying to pretend that he was a strong man. Well, I soon blew that out of the water, and it wasn't difficult. He made it very easy. But Margaret Thatcher, I just happened, and I wonder how different my life would have been if I just hadn't happened to notice. I went round to my mum's house, and she had the television on when Ted Heath, of course, was forced out in the second general election of 1974. That was the October election, which he in actual fact won, and the Queen, I don't know if you're aware of this, the Queen did ask him to form a government. But he threw a hissy fit because he thought it shouldn't be a matter for the Queen to have to ask him, because people should have voted for him and his strongman actor. Well, right, people have more sense, it seems. But that is a fact. But then, of course, there was the talk of, well, who's going to replace him? My mother absolutely adored Ted Heath. She was a very, very intelligent woman, bar that one thing. I don't like speaking ill of her, but I don't know whatever she meant by that, but it was a saying people would use in those days. Oh, I give him all my cigarette cards, she used to say. And I couldn't stand. And then Maggie Thatcher, or Margaret, she would not be called Maggie, suddenly appeared on the television. And Mrs. Thatcher, there are rumours that you're going to put your... amazingly patronising. There are rumours that you're going to put your name for. But you wouldn't surely put your name forward. There's never been a woman Prime Minister. And Maggie played an absolute... Sorry, I shouldn't keep calling her that. She hated being called Maggie. But Margaret said, if that were to be the case, said she, I would tell you here and now, she said, the government of which I was, listen to these words carefully, the government of which, and then that was the first I saw, those determined blue eyes, which I'd never noticed before, the government of which I was a part made mistakes, and I hold my hand up, and she put her hand up, the honesty of it, and I for one, were I to consider putting my name forward, I for one, she said, made mistakes too, and I hold my hand up and bear my share of the collective cabinet responsibility. She's going to get it. I said, don't be so ridiculous, my mother nearly had kittens. Well, I said, I waited, right, and Oh, right, okay. And I was very hard up in those days. £1 was a lot of money back then. And I said, Ma, I said, could you lend me a tenner? What would I lend you a tenner for? I said, I want to put a bet on Maggie Thatcher. I can't stand that woman. I'll be lending you no money. I went up to the bookies up Sackville Road, and there's a real old East End guy with a massive cigar hanging handicap. I always remember this, sort of affixed to the bottom corner of his lip, his lower lip. Yeah. What do you want? Lovely intro to the shop, you know, how to win customers, etc. That's what I want to put.
Communist Party member by the sound of it.
Oh no, well, in that respect, yes. In that respect, oh yes. But I said I want to put a bet on. What race? I said it's not a race. I said it's the political. Political. I said yes. I said I want to put a bet on Margaret Thatcher to win. Get out of here, said he. She ain't even put on it. Here, you hear this? This guy wants to put a bet. I was the laughing stock of the shop. He said, why stop there? Why not make it a tenner? Why not a pony? Why not whatever that thing is for £100? I said, let me tell you. I said, if I had £1 million, I said, I would level that on your counter here and now, and I'd be running this shop, and I'd be running the chain. I said, what odds are you going to get? Ooh, 100 to 1, happy with that? I said, it'll do. When the news flash came through, of course, I happened to be round. Rather rubbing salt in poor Ma's wounds, I happened to be round to walk in when they were waiting for the thing, and the new leader, and I can remember, and it was that Alistair Burnett again, and the new leader, they're looking down the old ticker tape thing on the desk of the Conservative Party his eyebrows went like, Margaret Thatcher, he gasped. I burst into tears. I said, still wish you, I said, I said, do you regret not lending me that? Oh, go to hell. It's out of my house. You know what, it wasn't long before Ma was a complete and utter Maggie Thatcher fan. And I'll tell you why. Because, well, one, not only did she win the election in 75, but 79, I beg your pardon, she had to wait 4 long years in opposition. It took a while to get her act together and get it right. She was awful to begin with. But, you know, the basic ingredients were there. And of course, as soon as she won the election, the Iranian embassy, the Ayatollah wallahs had taken over in Iran, and of course people that I generally would have supported wanted out with those militants, go back to a Western style, and they occupied the embassy. Straight away Mrs. T dispatched the SAS, and the rest is history. Oh, that changed not only Ma's point of view, but so many people who didn't like her, despite they were Tories. God, I said, yes, she's the only man among them, isn't she?
So when did you flip, and when did you, because you say during the mid-70s you were starting to see gaps in the communist ideology. So when did you...
Well, I'll tell you when I flipped, because it really began after, I mean, yes, I thought, Thatcher will win, because I was a political animal, you know. Didn't mean to say I necessarily supported. I thought, well, there's honesty, and that's something I've never heard from a mainstream politician before. That's a refreshing change. But it was when Harold Wilson handed over what remained of the government to that absolute clot, Jim Callaghan, and it was just, and well, for anybody that remembers the winter of discontent, they couldn't even bury the bodies, and now that really made me think this is completely wrong, and I began to actually feel, in many respects, guilty for the part I played in creating this monster with my trade union and communist activities. And Margaret Thatcher was saying the right thing, and it took a period of over about a couple of years, and anyway at the time my girlfriend Jackie She was very much a Tory, and you know, oh, I like her. Right? She was a Yorkshire woman, no nonsense Yorkshire woman.
It must have been difficult when you're politically so far apart.
It was. I'll tell you now. I am a deep thinker, and I need very little sleep. 4 hours. If I get 4 hours unbroken sleep, even now at nearly 74, that will do me. But as you see, from a very busy evening yesterday, I'm up and at it again. But the contradictions in my head took a lot of resolving, a lot of resolving. You can't just flip, and if you did flip just like that, you'd be, an opportunist or somebody who's just a greasy pole climber. Now, I've never been a greasy pole climber. And yes, when I was in the Communists, yes, I did want to be on the Central Committee, because I was committed, not for aggrandisement, but because I knew I could do a good job, and I'm not going to be falsely modest about it. They knew I could do a good job, because I was attacked by a guy, John Hannington, who was a shop steward at Ford's in Dagenham. Who the hell does he think he is with his college boy accent trying to lecture us? Dorothy Birch, I may not like Dorothy Birch, my God, she absolutely ripped into him. And she said, after the revolution, we want everybody to be speaking proper English, like this man. Just because, you know, she was educated, her husband wasn't, if you get what I mean. Oh, she absolutely flipped. She said, I'll tell you something now, he's worth 100 of you to this party, so you just shut your trap. Not another word out of you, John Hannington, or you're out. Oh, because that's what they were. They're right, off with their heads. Oh no, they knew exactly who and what they wanted. She said, how has he done? What has he done? I thought, you know, I honestly felt embarrassed. I really did, you know, after all this praise being heaped on me, I'm not really comfortable, and I never have been. I'm still not particularly comfortable about that. I just like to get on with the job. She said that he couldn't get them from the left, he got them from the right, using the example of the higher officers. Well, two can play that game. We're on strike. If you're coming back, we're out. He got them from the centre. It's called tactics, and he's the perfect example, oh God, she lashed him, of what we've been preaching.
But she was talking about revolution still.
Oh yeah. But revolutions.
Do they really believe this, though? I mean, are they, you know, just saying it? Cause
it would have happened. It would have happened. Yeah. I tell you now, it would have happened. But you see, the trouble is, they devoured themselves.
Yeah.
They're still going now. I bumped into one of them who's still at it in the NUT.
Was that one who?
A few years back.
You knew them at that time?
Oh yes.
And they're still at it?
Oh yeah. He's still alive as far as I'm aware, and up in Bracknell in Berkshire. Right. So I'm not going to mention his name.
That's interesting.
I always got on with him.
Yeah.
And now he was, let's put it this way, everybody used to say his nickname was Berrier. We know who Berrier was. But it would have happened if they hadn't turned on themselves, and that's exactly what they've done. They devoured one another because of their suspicious minds, and because of that mentality, exactly like Stalin. How many people, perfectly innocent, got a bullet through the brain because, oh, he became paranoid, they're after my job. And that is the trouble. And that's what I don't like basically about political parties. Full of greasy pole climbers. It's all about me, me, me. And they're professing to be looking after the interests of the ordinary man and woman.
And you saw this in the Conservative Party as well?
Oh,
Nigel,
boy did I see that in the Conservative Party.
Were they just a more polished set of pole climbers?
More English gentlemanly.
Yeah. But
that's how I put it.
As ruthless.
As, dangerous people again. Now, you might find this hard to believe, but the BBC couldn't get enough of me. Yes, when I was a communist that was one thing, but when I formed the breakaway official Hove Conservative Party with a number of colleagues, we walked out of Hove Conservative Association and set up an alternative. Now, we got the Mayor and Mayoress out on our first attempt in 1991. We didn't win. We didn't intend to win. That was tactics. That was just the beginning. Who is common enemy number one? Take them out. 1995, it was national news headlines. Hove, True Blue Hove, which once had not a single Labour MP in it until it merged with Portslade, turned red overnight. And the university's professor of politics said, well, had there been proportional representation, the OHC, which we quickly become abbreviated down to, would have had approximately 2.8 councillors. We couldn't work out who'd be the 0.8.